Welcome to the Vortex.
My name's Gerald Bringle. I come from Baghdad, Arizona, and I'm interested in metaphysical research. And one of the experiences I had early on in my research was when I went to Egypt and actually spent one night in the pyramids. To give you a background of how this came about, I was interested in numerology, and for many years, 5 years, I studied numerology and studied very deeply, and became very absorbed in numerology. And this led into the study of pyramids, the science of pyramids, Egyptology, and the chronology of the pharaohs in Egypt, and the geography of Egypt. And for 5 years, I really got heavily involved in Egyptology and the science of pyramids. I bought several books on the subjects, and some of the books that I bought were hard to find. Some of the books were rare books. And I became absorbed in this study. Well, I live close to the town of Prescott, Arizona, and one day I was walking down the street in Prescott, and I passed a travel agency. I've never been in a travel agency before in my life. And I looked in the travel agency, and they had a magazine rack in there, and they had some brochures that they were displaying. And I saw one, it said Egypt, and I was just gravitated to this pamphlet about Egypt. And I picked the pamphlet up, and I was looking at it, and I was so amazed because all the places on this tour that was offered were places that I had studied about and I was familiar about because I had read about them. Well, the lady that owned this travel agency, I think she was Hungarian or something like that, and she came up behind me and she sort of looked over my shoulder, and she says to me in her accent, she says, "Well, when you want to go to Egypt?" So I looked down at this pamphlet, and I arbitrarily picked out some dates that I would like to go to Egypt. I just quickly calculated that I could go at that particular time. And I pointed to those dates in the pamphlet. So she says to me, she says, "Well, you give me $240, we get the ball rolling on this thing." And I didn't even have 2 nickels in my pocket to rub together. So I drove back to where I worked, and we had a credit union. I borrowed the money for the tour from the credit union and set up to the tour, and I was off to Egypt. It was a 2-year tour, 2-week tour, going over to Egypt. And it was a wonderful tour, and it was well planned out, and I was just thrilled to death. The day that we went to the Great Pyramids of Egypt, we took the tour bus from our hotel, and we drove up to where the Great Pyramid was, and they parked the tour bus. And we had a choice. We could either walk up to where the pyramid was, or we could ride a camel. So I decided to ride the camel up there rather than walk through the sand. And when I got to where the pyramids were, the camel driver had the camel kneel down so I could dismount. And during the ride up to where the pyramid was, I became so emotional because the closer I got, the bigger these things were, and it was just a very emotional thing that I was experiencing, like tears were running down my cheeks. And the camel driver said to me, he says, "I know what you're here for." Well, I thought, well, that's nice, because I don't. So we became friends, and we took the tour of the pyramids, and with his help, we were able to arrange a night in the pyramid with the guards. And my tour guide, he told me, he said, "Gerald, the bus leaves at 7 o'clock in the morning, you better be there." So I said, I will. And I went into the pyramid, and the only thing I had was a flashlight. And at 11 o'clock, they close the gates. They have big iron gates, and they close the gates, and they don't open them up till 6 o'clock in the morning. So you're in there until they open the gates. Well, I went into the pyramid about 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, and I had the 2-cell flashlight, and I went down to where the descending passage was in the pyramid, and I tried to go down there, but it's very uncomfortable because you can't stand up. You could either crawl or you can duck walk down this passage. I went down there a little ways, and it was too uncomfortable, so I turned around and I came back up, and I went to the area of the pyramid called the Grand Gallery. And the Grand Gallery is a huge place inside of the pyramid. And originally, when you entered the Grand Gallery, they had a drop of about 18 feet, and then you walked along the floor of this thing. Then you had to climb back up out of this recessed area. But nowadays, they've made it convenient for the tourists, and they just have planks all the way across from one side to the other. So I walked across these planks, and I went into the part of the pyramid. It was called the Queen's Chamber. The Queen's Chamber is lined with pink granite, and they do have a niche in there. And I went over there and I stood in the niche, and I toned. I turned my flashlight out, and I just did some toning in there and seeing what kind of feeling I was feeling, if there was anything unusual, and nothing was really unusual. So I walked out of the Queen's Chamber, and you have to go around the corner and then go up to get into the King's Chamber. I walked up into the King's Chamber, and the King's Chamber is lined with red granite. And I had my flashlight on, but I turned it off, and I stood right in the very center of this big room, and I did some toning. And the red granite responded to the toning that I was doing. It amplified the tone, and the hair on the back of my neck actually stood up. And I was going, oh, and then I made another tone. It was like this. And I did several different pitches, and it did affect my physical body. It gave me chills all over. After I did some toning, then I went over to the place in the pyramid. It was called the sarcophagus, and the sarcophagus is like a big box. It's like a coffin. And I laid down inside of the sarcophagus on my back. And I just laid there for a few minutes and just trying to get the feel of what was going on. And I heard somebody walking. So I got up and I thought, well, that's unusual. I'm supposed to be the only one inside of this pyramid here. I paid that guy $40 for me to stay in the pyramid by myself tonight. There's not supposed to be anybody else in here. So I took my flashlight and I walked down to where the Grand Gallery is, and I shone my flashlight all over in there, and I could not see anybody. And so I thought to myself, well, what it is just temperature changes, and these planks are creaking. I went back up into the King's Chamber, and I laid down in the sarcophagus, and I just no more than laid down in the sarcophagus, and the whole room lit up as if somebody had turned on 10 neon light bulbs. There was a brilliant light inside of there, and I had no idea what was happening, and I was too afraid to get up and look over the side of the sarcophagus to see what was happening. And I heard people walking as if they had slippers on. I heard this